Hi, and welcome to our monthly feature of The Art of English. It's our March edition. Hello, I'm Linda, and this is Peter.
Hello, everyone.
And we're going to be talking about Lewis Carroll's classic, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which was published in 1865. And this classic is definitely a children's book, and it's been a classic for children for a really long time, but it's also for adults. It's for all ages. So we're very delighted to be able to talk about Alice's adventures with you today, and we appreciate all the feedback we've been getting about The Art of English. We're glad that you're enjoying it and continue to give us feedback.
Yes, please do. We love to be able to interact with you this way, even though this isn't live. Nevertheless, your comments are great. They give us ideas of where to go with future episodes, so keep it up.
Yes. And so let us open up with reading the excerpt from the Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. The Hatter was the first to break the silence.
What day of the month is it?
He said, turning to Alice. He had taken his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and then and holding it to his ear. Alice considered a little and then said, "The 4th.
2 days wrong,"
sighed the Hatter.
"I told you butter wouldn't suit the works,"
he added, looking angrily at the March Hare.
"It was the best butter,"
the March Hare meekly replied.
"Yes, but some crumbs must have gotten in as well,"
the Hatter grumbled.
"You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife."
The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily. Then he dipped it into his cup of tea and looked at it again. But he could think of nothing better to say than his first remark.
"It was the best butter, you know."
Alice had been looking over his shoulder with some curiosity. "What a funny watch," she remarked. "It tells the day of the month and doesn't tell what o'clock it is."
"Why should it?"
muttered the Hatter.
"Does your watch tell you what year it is?"
"Of course not," Alice replied very readily. "But that's because it stays the same year for such a long time together."
"Which is just the case with mine,"
said the Hatter. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to have no sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. "I don't quite understand you," she said, as politely as she could. So let's look at our first question. And just to preface that, we are introduced to a few characters here. And there are actually a lot of colorful characters in this book, in Lewis Carroll's book. And the characters that we meet in this excerpt include Alice, of course, our protagonist, the March Hare, the Mad Hatter, although he's not called the Mad Hatter in the book, he's just called the Hatter, but we all know him as the Mad Hatter.
Yeah, it's funny the way he's come to be called the Mad Hatter, because Lewis Carroll doesn't actually write anywhere that that's the Mad Hatter. She was talking to the Mad Hatter. He just calls her the Hatter. But the chapter title that this excerpt is from is called A Mad Tea Party. Mm-hmm. And since the Hatter is at this mad tea party, somehow Mad and his name got linked together.
Yes, and he does show qualities of being mad. And let's just get into this word a little bit. Mad can have different meanings if you're using British English or American English. So in American English, when you say somebody is mad, it means that they're angry.
Right.
But in British English, if you refer to someone as mad, it can mean that they're crazy, they have they're a little bit loony or nutty. So it can have two different meanings. And this because it is written by a British person, it has the meaning of crazy. So it's a crazy tea party that Alice has stumbled into.
Right, and there's even a little bonus for you. One of the characters we just noticed is called the March Hare. There is actually an English expression called mad as a March Hare.
Mm-hmm. As mad as a March Hare.
Yes, which means it's just a sort of fancy way of saying someone's loony, someone's crazy, mad as a March Hare. And it comes in part from this, but I believe that Carroll himself was playing off of that phrase in naming this hare the March Hare and putting him at a mad tea party. He was kind of taking an expression and giving it an actual form, making it an actual character, which is typical of the way Carroll approaches all of his writing. He's always very inventive and very clever, and there's lots of puns, words with double meanings throughout the Alice books. There's a lot of fantasy too, and great characters like Linda was saying, but that's just another level that there is to the book, is that Carroll is a very clever writer, and the more you read it, the more you'll find things other than just the purely fantastical elements.
Exactly. And if we delve a little bit more into the origin of the March Hare and his name, if you think about rabbits, March, that is their breeding season. And so they are, if you've ever seen a rabbit and heater breeding, like they're crazy. They're jumping all over the place. They're running around. And so that is where this idea of being crazy, this March Hare comes from. And there is another character at the tea party who isn't mentioned. He doesn't have a line in this excerpt, but that is the dormouse.
Yeah, and you can kind of see him in the illustration here on your advanced magazine page there. He's sort of scrunched down between the March Hare with the big ears and the Mad Hatter with the big hat. And as the chapter progresses beyond this excerpt, the dormouse has some dialogue, although he seems to say it while never really opening his eyes, never really waking up from his sleep. But later on in the chapter, they actually ask the dormouse to tell them a story and be quick about it before you fall asleep again. So again, just some of the bizarre humor that is throughout this story.
So they're all kind of peculiar. And that brings us to our first question. What is peculiar about the March Hare? So we're saying all of these characters have some peculiarities, but what is particularly peculiar about the March Hare?
Yes, well, you could say what's peculiar about him is that he talks. Rabbits, hares, which is just another word for a kind of rabbit, generally don't talk. Most animals don't talk. But here in the book, they do talk. The March Hare talks. Another thing peculiar about him is that when the Mad Hatter complains that there seems to be something wrong with his watch, it is a pocket watch, right?
It's a pocket watch.
And so a pocket watch, by the way, is a watch that you wouldn't just wear on a band around your wrist. Pocket watch, maybe you've seen them in movies. It's where it's connected to a chain, and you usually take it out of a vest pocket of some sort, and you pop it open, and you see what time it is. And it's sort of more fancy, more ornate. That's a pocket watch. The Hatter tells the March Hare, or whoever's listening, that the watch is 2 days wrong, it's not working, and they argue about apparently how the March Hare attempted to fix the watch earlier by putting butter in it. You know, who knows what that means. But then the March Hare takes the watch, and as if trying to fix it, he dips it into his cup of tea.
Yeah, like a biscuit.
Like a biscuit.
That's so strange.
And no explanation is given. No, the Hatter doesn't say, "What are you doing? You're ruining the pocket watch." It's almost as though this is a normal thing at the Mad Tea Party and in Wonderland generally. And that is just one of hundreds of examples throughout the book where people do odd things, what we would think of as odd, and what Alice usually notices as being odd, and no one says anything about it.
Yeah.
It's just sort of taken for granted. Oh, of course you dip a pocket watch into a cup of tea if there's something wrong with it. You never know. That might do some good.
Yeah, he's just trying different things. Something else that's a little strange about him, he just repeats himself. He has the line like, "Oh, it was the best butter." And, he says that again after dipping the pocket watch in the tea. Like he's stuck on that line. Like
the idea of butter being the thing to fix a watch in the first place is questionable, but the March Hare seems so depressed because it was the best butter. It was, we don't even know what that means. The best tasting butter, the most healthy butter, the best butter for fixing a clock. We don't know. And that's, again, typical of Alice in Wonderland and what creates this dream-like feeling of the entire story. It's, again, partly it's the fantastical elements and the characters that she meets, the strange creatures that she meets, the strange things that happen to her. But it's also this sense of how when you're in a dream, people will say things and do things that when you think about it don't really make sense. But somehow in a dream, you kind of usually go along with it or you wait to see what happens next, just like Alice. The whole book is like reading, it's like experiencing a dream.
Yes,
and it's
it has.
That's not easy to do.
Yeah, there are a lot of dreamlike qualities in the stories that are woven in the book. So let us go to the second question. What is a possible explanation for why Alice's answer is 2 days wrong? So the Hatter had asked Alice what day it was, or what day of the month it was. And she replied the 4th, because actually the date that this is supposed to have taken place was May 4th. Alice's birthday, I believe.
I think you're right,
yes. And he says his response is 2 days wrong. So that might mean that Alice's answer is wrong, or it could mean the watch was wrong. And there are different theories about what he actually means or what's going on. But one possible explanation could be that his watch, since it's not telling the time, it's not telling what o'clock it is, it's telling what day of the month it is. And so it could be based on the lunar calendar instead of the solar calendar, which is what mostly everyone else uses. And so that is just another peculiarity about this character and the characters in general. So he doesn't have a normal watch. He has a watch that tells the day instead of the time. And so Alice, I can understand her confusion in being at this tea party, because when she first arrives at the tea party, this is before the excerpt that we have here begins, she sees that there are a lot of open seats and there are just the 3 characters there, but they tell her there's no space at the table for her, but there's so many empty seats, so she just sits down. And there are so many other things that causes her to be confused. And even speaking English, like her last line is in the excerpt is that she doesn't quite understand. She knows that they're speaking English, it's clearly English, but she still can't understand what they're saying.
Yeah, and that's another level of enjoyment to the whole book as it is we talked about it being like being in a dream, but it's also a very good example, a literary example of what it's like to experience the world as a child. Like Alice is. Alice is a child, probably not more than 10 years old, I would think, somewhere between...
She's supposed to be 7 years old in the book.
She's supposed to be 7 years old, yeah. And I mean, if you can think back to when you were 7 or 8 years old and you were beginning to learn spend time with adults, and you would go, sometimes the adults would get together in some way and they'd talk about things and you didn't understand what they were talking about, mainly because, they were talking about adult things and using abstract ideas and concepts the way adults do. But a child's brain hasn't developed that yet. So for a child to hear conversation like that, although it's perfectly understood by the adults, to the child, it can very often sound just like this scene at the Mad Tea Party or any number of scenes in the book. You read the book and you see Alice is always wondering what's going on and why people are doing this and why you said that and this and that, and just trying to sort of figure things out. And that's what we do when we're 7 years old. We're just trying to figure out the world with all these adults saying these strange things and seeming to mean something by what they're saying, but something that we just can't understand yet.
Yes, as a child, the world might seem very confusing because, you don't understand what's going on. It's a level above you. And also, we can relate as language learners.
Absolutely, yeah.
You can be speaking a language or listening to a language that you're supposed to be able to understand, but somehow it's not comprehending.
Right. It's like the last few lines of our excerpt here today. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to have no sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. I don't quite understand you, she said as politely as she could. That's sort of what she could be saying at almost every turn and moment of the book. I don't quite understand you. Yeah. It's not completely just off-the-wall bizarre, like some strange, surreal painting of some sort. You look at it, it just doesn't make sense one way or the other. Carol is brilliant at being able to make things seem to make just enough sense so that we are always intrigued to try to figure out what is actually going on. It has a feel of sanity to it. It has a feel of logic and coherence and rationality to it. But as we go through the story, just like in a dream, we are never completely enlightened as to what's going on. We never really get a grasp of the whole story and, why Alice is even here.
Yeah. And it also demonstrates his understanding of how children think, how a small child thinks. But fortunately, that's all the time that we have here to talk about Alice in Wonderland with you. But please give us your feedback in the comments, and we hope to see you next month when we talk about the art of English again.
Yes, come back next month. Until then, happy reading.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.